Our third item on the agenda today is day 2 of stage 2 proceedings on the Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland Bill at stage 2. I welcome to the meeting Liam MacArthur, member in charge of the bill, and a number of other members who have lodged amendments to the bill. We will not go beyond the debate on Amendment 242 today. That is the debate on the group entitled Advocacy Services. This means that no amendments beyond Amendment 243 in the Marshall list will be called today. And I intend to suspend the meeting shortly before 11 a.m. this morning to enable members and staff to participate in an act of remembrance in the Parliament's garden lobby. I call Amendment 65 in the name of Liam MacArthur, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. I point out that Amendment 47 is pre-empted by Amendment 59 to be debated in the group assessments of the terminally ill adult. Liam MacArthur to move Amendment 65 and to speak to all amendments in the group.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. Colleagues, could I maybe start with a declaration of interest and remind the committee that I received support from 3 separate campaign organisations, Dignity and Dying, Friends at the End and Humanist Society Scotland, who have helped in supporting the costs of a website during the consultation process on my bill and helping the support of a staff member in relation to this bill. Again, as with last week, let me start with my amendment before moving on to the considerable other amendments in this grouping. My Amendment 65 allows Scottish ministers to regulate any training that the coordinating registered medical practitioner, independent regulated medical practitioner and authorised health professional must have completed in order to carry out their roles under this bill. I made clear throughout stage 1 that training will be required for those health professionals directly involved in the assisted dying process. A specific requirement for training was not included in the bill because I believe the profession itself is best placed to devise, develop and roll out training that it considers most appropriate, and that training did not require to be mandated in the bill. Further, there are already qualifications and experience requirements for medical professionals set out in the bill, which I've now extended to authorised health professionals. It's also worth acknowledging that the Health and Care Staffing Act 2019 already places a duty on health boards and the Scottish Health Service to ensure staff are suitably trained. After reflecting further ahead of stage 2, however, I've lodged Amendments 65, 67, 34A, 35A, 35B, 46A and 47A to add the provision of training to the existing regulating powers the bill confers on ministers with regard to the qualifications and experience the coordinating registered medical practitioner and independent registered medical practitioner. And if my relevant amendments at 34 and 35 are agreed to, authorised health professionals should have. This will allow ministers to regulate after consultation with relevant partners for training, qualifications and experience that those health professionals must have to participate in any assisted dying scheme. Therefore, Amendment 65 adds training to the regulations Scottish ministers may make in relation to the qualifications and experience required to take on the role of a coordinating registered medical practitioner. Amendment 67 does likewise for the role of independent registered medical practitioner, and Amendment 34A does the same thing for the role of the authorised health professional by adding training to my own Amendment 34, which allows Scottish ministers to make regulations setting out the qualifications and experience a registered medical practitioner or a registered nurse should have in order to take on the role of authorised health professional. Amendments 35A and 35B are consequential, adding training to Amendment 35, which requires the regulations be made under Amendment 34, with the authorised health professional to be consulted on before they are laid or made. And Amendments 46A and 47A are also consequential, adding training to Amendments 46 and 47, which require first sets of regulations to be subject to the affirmative procedure and subsequent regulations to be subject to the negative procedure. Amendment 48 is consequential and clarifies that Section 15(8) regulations are which, as the it clarifies which Section 15(8) regulations are which, as there would be 2 regulation-making powers in that subsection. I note that Amendment 47 is pre-empted by Amendment 59, which we'll come to in a later grouping. Amendment 34B, lodged by Paul Sweeney, amends my own Amendment 34 to change may to must to require Scottish ministers to make regulations. This links to certain other amendments in the group, so turning to those, while I've always considered those working in healthcare best placed to determine training factors, and therefore wanted to allow some flexibility as to whether this was determined by government regulation. I'm open to amendments 34B, 224 and 230, which would make it a requirement for such regulations to be brought forward. I note the Government suggests Amendment 34, in its view, may be defective, so Mr Sweeney may wish to press this amendment, may not wish to press this amendment at this point, pending further discussions with the Government ahead of Stage 3. On Ms Duncan Glancy's Amendment 225, which sets out that Scottish Ministers must, in relation to the coordinating registered medical practitioner, specify training and experience related to a range of matters, including knowledge of palliative care and alternative care options, understanding of independent living, in accordance with Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, awareness and identification of coercion, pressure or undue influence, equality and non-discrimination principles, with specific reference to the rights and experience of persons with disabilities, terminal illness or socio-economic disadvantage. I note that the provision extends only to the coordinating registered medical practitioner and not to the independent registered practitioner. Again, I'm of the view that those working in healthcare are best placed to determine what training would be required and most useful. I certainly agree with Ms Duncan Glancy on the importance of doctors being appropriately trained on all relevant issues, including in areas such as palliative care and the rights of disabled people, but do not consider that this sort of detail is appropriate for the face of the bill. I certainly will, yes.
I thank the member for taking the intervention and good morning. Can I just clarify then, if the amendment was brought back at Stage 3 and included the coordinating and the independent practitioner, would the member support it?
I thank Pam Duncan Glancy for the question. I think there is an issue in terms of it not referring to both, but I think the principal concern I have is how appropriate it is to put that level of detail on the face of the bill, as opposed to requiring that through guidance as being one of the aspects that needs to be incorporated into training, and making sure that those participating in the process are aware of the issues that I think Pam Duncan Glancy quite rightly raises in the context of this provision. Very briefly.
I'll be brief. Much appreciated. I understand the concerns around that. However, I think most of these things are very important, and the member will know that if something isn't on the face of legislation, it becomes very much at the discretion of the coordinating bodies, and when resources are tight, some of those things may not be supported or funded. Does the member think there are any aspects of what that amendment does would be crucial to set out in legislation to protect against it being ruled out because they didn't have enough money to provide the training?
I again welcome that intervention. I mean, I think the issues that are highlighted in this amendment are extremely important and will be crucial in relation to the assessments being made of particular individuals, not across the board. Again, I think one needs to take into account whether or not this is more appropriately set out in the bill or would be best left to secondary legislation or guidance. And I do believe that these issues are better reflected in guidance. I don't think that's a resource issue. I think it's making sure that the profession are able to have input into the way that training is designed and taken forward. Turning to Jackie Bailey's amendments 66, 68, 70, 71, 71A and 72, I've spoken to my amendments on the issue of training and would ask the member not to press these amendments and ask members not to support the amendments and to support the amendments I have lodged instead. My amendments allow Scottish Ministers to regulate for training, in addition to qualifications and experience, relevant to the coordinating registered medical practitioner, independent registered medical practitioner and authorised health professional, and require all regulations to be consulted on. On Jackie Bailey's Amendment 49, it requires any regulations made in relation to qualifications and experience the coordinating practitioner should have to include minimum training required, qualifications and experience specific to dealing with a person being aged between 18 and 24, qualifications and experience specific to dealing with a person with fluctuating illness and or an unpredictable prognosis. The amendment also requires Scottish Ministers to review the regulations in relation to qualifications and experience but not training from time to time. I'm certainly, again, sympathetic, not least due to my own engagement with CHAS over the past few years, but again, I draw members' attention to my own amendments in relation to training. These will allow ministers to make regulations setting out what training, as well as qualifications experience, a person must have to be the coordinating practitioner, the independent registered medical practitioner and authorised health professional. I note that as the amendments stand, the coordinating registered medical practitioner would be subject to this amendment, but not the independent registered medical practitioner. I also note that the minimum training standards required part of the amendment may overlap with Jackie Bailey's amendments 66 and 71, which also provide for the coordinating practitioner to have completed training to be specified by ministers in regulations. In terms of the part of the amendment which relates to specific qualifications and experience for those aged under 25, I note that the regulation-making powers in the bill as introduced would allow ministers to do this if felt necessary. I also note that ministers are required to consult with relevant persons ahead of laying any such regulations to ensure that what is considered necessary by medical professionals is properly reflected. This is the case for the amendment which is concerned with specific training and experience in relation to diseases, illnesses or conditions of a fluctuating nature and with unpredictable prognoses. On that basis, I would ask Jackie Bailey not to press, consider how the bill as amended stands after stage 2 and as ever I'm very happy to work with her ahead of stage 3 on any further aspects that may need to be addressed. Turning to Mr Whittle's Amendment 155, Section 6.6 of the bill sets out the circumstances in which an independent registered medical practitioner can carry out an assessment under Section 6.3. Amendment 155 adds the requirements that the independent registered medical practitioner must not have consulted with the coordinating registered medical practitioner on the case, been provided with access to any notes prepared by the coordinating practitioner on the coordinating practitioner's assessment, been provided with any other notes prepared by the coordinating registered medical practitioner since the date of the first declaration. With regard to maintaining the independence of the two doctors, I believe that steps would be taken to ensure that this is the case as a matter of existing practice. And again, I believe consistency in the principles and approach with other areas of medicine is important. But again, I'm open to further discussion with Mr Whittle on this. Finally, I consider Amendment 196 from Mr Whittle and Paul Sweeney's amendments 254, 255, 270 to be unnecessary due to the amendments I've lodged on training. I look forward to the comments from other members and will respond to those if appropriate. But thank you very much, Kavita.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. Can you move your amendment, please?
Sorry, and I move my amendment.
Thank you. Paul Sweeney to speak to Amendment 224 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. In this group, I propose to move two sets of amendments, 3 dealing with capacity and 2 with practicalities. So I will therefore address them in their 2 sections. Firstly, on capacity amendments 224, 230 and 34B. Assessing capacity is an extremely complex task. It requires specific expertise and careful judgment. That's one of the reasons why the Medical and Dental Defence Union of Scotland has recommended the creation of a multidisciplinary panel. But it also means that we need to be clear about who is qualified to make these assessments in the first place. The amendments 224, 230 and 34B would legally require, rather than simply allow, the Scottish ministers to set out by regulation the qualifications and experience needed for doctors taking part in the assisted dying processes. This ensures only appropriately trained and experienced practitioners are involved, strengthening safeguards for both patients seeking to access this service and participating clinicians. These amendments are about giving clinicians the tools and confidence that they need to carry out their duties responsibly and ensuring that patients receive careful assessment. So 224 proposes to leave out may and inserts must. Similarly to 30 proposes to leave out may and insert must by strengthening the language. I note Mr MacArthur's comments on his Amendment 34 and I'm happy to rest on that at this stage pending further discussions. Turning to practicalities, Amendments 254 and 255. This group strengthens the practical framework for administering assisted dying safely and responsibly. These 2 amendments would require the Scottish ministers to provide proper training for doctors. This guarantees a high level of standard of care, creating a better working environment for medical staff and reassurance to patients. Together, these measures would ensure safety and consistency during the most sensitive stage of any assisted dying process.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. Daniel Johnson to speak on behalf of Jackie Bailey to Amendment 66 and other amendments in the group.
Indeed, thank you very much, Convener. And I'm going to be taking forward a number of amendments in the name of Jackie Bailey this morning, so the committee will have to bear with me. They're good to hear maybe more than they might have appreciated they would from me this morning. I think, as has already been covered in last week's evidence, when we look at the concerns, is that while we may examine what is on the face of the bill, very much of what will actually be enacted and put into effect will be a matter of practice and a matter of professional conduct. And that's why I think training is so important, both in terms of actually how this bill operates at the start, but also how it continues to operate as it evolves over time, should it be passed by this Parliament. And therefore, ensuring that we have adequate provision in the bill, both to set out what training is required by the professionals that we are asking to undertake the most sensitive of judgments, but critically, the oversight of that training, I think, is very important. Yes.
Well, I can. Thank you. Declaration of interest of practising NHS GP. Given that this will be put to the medical profession to deal with, to enact and to actually do the work, that is the same as many other aspects of medical training. So, for example, as a GP, I have a professional responsibility to keep myself up to date. But there is also this fact that medicine changes every 10 years. Like, everything you learn at med school is almost useless as you qualify. So, is it not better to allow the professionals to decide what they need when it comes to training and have that evolving process, because it must be evolving because things change, rather than have MSPs who are not qualified to make those absolute decisions do it?
So, I think those points are well made, but let's be also clear about what this amendment does, but actually critically where it comes from. Because these amendments have been drafted in conjunction with the British Medical Association and other professional bodies. So it is not MSPs asking for this. This is the professions themselves who are concerned by the very points that I have set out. And furthermore, when you look at Amendment 71 in particular, it states very plainly that these regulations must be made in consultation with trade unions and professional bodies. And further to all of that, and I think these matters are always a matter of balance. But the medical profession and the area of medical practice is highly regulated. It is not true to say that essentially the law has nothing to say about medical practice, doesn't set out standards, doesn't set out review periods, doesn't set out expectations around training and professional standards. It does. So what Amendment 71 does is set out the requirement for ministers to put in place regulations to set out not just the training requirements but professional standards and keep those under review. Amendments 66, 68, 70 and 72 are largely consequential to those. In addition to that, Amendment 71A, in addition to those medical and clinical considerations, 71 sets out the need to have consideration for domestic abuse. Again, there's been a great deal of concern regarding the possibility of coercion and undue pressure being placed upon individuals by third parties. And this amendment was drafted in consultation with Dr. Annie Donaldson, who is an expert academic on matters of domestic abuse. And I think it is important that any such training does take account of the dynamics of domestic abuse, how these things can take place, and how to respond effectively when these matters may come into play, and actually how treatment can be offered in these circumstances. Finally, on Amendment 49, which, as Liam MacArthur has already alluded to, has been drafted in consultation with Chas, and I would point out that while Chas operates in Jackie Bailey's constituency, their office is in my constituency, so I don't know if that's a declaration of interest, but certainly there is an overlap there. I think it is true to say that the way terminal illnesses manifest in young people can be substantially different, and I think both in terms of how patients themselves are treated, but also actually the nature of those illnesses and understanding the prognoses do require a great deal of attention. And I think it is right that we think about how these provisions may extend to younger people who will find themselves in a very different set of circumstances to kind of the bulk of the people who we think of in this cohort who will be substantially older. And so with that, Amendment 49 seeks to put in specific requirements for training for those who are consulting young adults and younger people, assessing the degree to which the illness is terminal, advanced and progressive, and just adding some additional qualifications and understandings on that. And with that, I will bring my remarks to a close.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. Pam Duncan-Glancy to speak to Amendment 225 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Amendment 225 makes provision about training for medical practitioners providing assistance. It specifies that medical practitioners must undertake training or qualifications related to knowledge of palliative care and alternative care options to providing terminally ill adults assistance to end their own lives. Understanding, too, of independent living, in accordance with Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, awareness and identification of coercion, pressure or undue influence, equality and non-discrimination principles, with specific reference to the rights and experiences of disabled people, terminal illness and socio-economic disadvantage. The reason that these amendments, I believe, are crucial to this piece of legislation is as safeguarding around the concerns that have been raised by many, including some disabled people, about the impact that not having adequate information and support about right to practical assistance to lead an ordinary life through things that support independent living can have a huge impact on their lives. It can mean that disabled people feel like a burden. It can mean that they feel they don't have their care needs met. It can mean that they are frightened of what life could be like should they lose a particular function, when in fact when you meet with other disabled people or you have an understanding about what your rights are and what you should be able to expect, sometimes life can appear a lot more tolerable. And so I think it's crucial that people who are supporting people to carry out assisted suicide have that support and awareness in order to help them understand what their other options are. Yes, happily.
I thank Pam Duncan-Glancy for giving away, making a powerful case, Ms Glancy, but can I just check? Better training for the practitioner who's taken someone who's seeking assistance down through the process is, of course, to be welcome, but that wouldn't be in place of, say, a social work referral when they deem that to be required, or indeed a palliative care referral. Can I just ask for a bit of clarity? That's not instead of, is it including it? So both would be required in your view, or just the provisions that you're setting out, Ms Glancy?
Both would be required, and indeed there are amendments in further groups, including in my name and I think in the member's name, that would look at that. And of course there were amendments previously that would have encouraged such assessments, which I think would have been absolutely essential to safeguard people throughout this process. The point around identification and coercion, as committee members and others have noted, it's a difficult concept to fully appreciate. And from previous work that this Parliament has done around coercion, particularly in relation to gender-based violence and domestic abuse, it's really clear that it requires a specific nuanced approach so that people can understand the experience of each individual. But in this matter, it also, I think, is important to understand the effect of societal pressures that can also be considered coercive. Through time, that internalised ableism that I've mentioned in the past and that I mentioned in the Stage 1 debate, that can begin to infiltrate into disabled people's minds and lives, and including people who are seeking assistance in this Act. And so I think those areas are really, really important. We also know that training in UNCRPD, training on disability equality, training on what is available to support disabled people to access and enjoy lives in the same way as others with freedom, choice, dignity and control is hugely undervalued and not often provided, especially in financial constrained situations, which I think is important here, which is why I've asked that it be on the face of the bill. We are, of course, discussing, I'll finish this sentence and then I'll happily take the intervention. We are, of course, discussing not just about aspects of independent living such as self-directed support, which is obviously a right under the 2019 Act, but actually whether or not somebody will be assisted to die. And I think everybody around individuals needs to fully understand what available resources there are to support disabled people in those contexts. And I'm happy to take the intervention from my colleague Sandesh Galhani.
Thank you. I want everyone to live their best life. I want people with disabilities to live their best life. Your amendments seek to get people with disabilities in front of social workers. My contention would be, is this not the wrong point to be doing that? Should we not be getting people with disabilities to social workers a lot earlier than in the final moments of their life? And should that not be what we're doing, because that will help everyone rather than those right at the end?
I thank the member for the intervention. The member is quite right, which is why I think we should be legislating to make it easier to choose to live than to die. And at this point in time, we have a piece of legislation in front of us that isn't necessarily doing that. And we do know that our constituents face significant barriers in accessing social work assessments, some waiting considerable time for assessment. And so I think it's really important that social work assessments to support disabled people to live independently are provided in a timely fashion, backed up with the resources to meet the needs as assessed. Amendment 225 doesn't specifically require a referral to social work, but I think that that referral should be happening. I think it's a separate issue to what my amendment requires, which is that people are trained in understanding what the law around social work access, for example, is. And the member's right to point out that it's important. But I would argue that many professionals, due to the work that they're doing in their current role, and as the Royal College of GPs have pointed out, are doing a whole host of activity, and adding to this responsibility will require them to have an understanding of what all those responsibilities could include, including the ones set out in my Amendment 225. My Amendment 270 establishes an assisted dying training authority to develop and oversee mandatory training and accreditation for medical practitioners involved. The ADTA would ensure practitioners are trained in palliative care alternatives, recognising coercion or undue influence, and equality and non-discrimination principles. Only accredited practitioners could participate in assisted dying procedure, ensuring consistent standards, ethical awareness and public confidence. Assisted suicide is irreversible. Once it's carried out, it can't be undone. That means every decision to end a life must be made with complete information and with the confidence that those overseeing the process are fully competent in doing so and have all options available to them to explain to the person seeking access. Yet, as the bill is currently drafted, there isn't a requirement for mandatory training for medical practitioners involved. There are amendments, including in the name of Liam MacArthur, around regulation on that fact, but not about the detail. And I think the detail is what matters in legislation such as this. There's no guarantee that the individuals will be adequately equipped to detect coercion, undue influence or vulnerability, and there's no assurance that equality, non-discrimination and patients' rights will be consistently respected. I don't think this is a minor oversight. I think it's a profound gap in safeguards at the heart of a system that literally involves life and death. And so this amendment attempts to close that gap, upholds ethical standards and maintains public confidence in the process, ensuring consistency, professional competence and moral awareness across every step of the system. The state, if it decides to legalise assisted suicide, has a duty to protect the most vulnerable from error, from pressure and from inadequate care. This amendment enshrines that duty in law, ensuring decisions about life and death are made responsibly, ethically and transparently. Thank you, Convener.
Brian Whittle to speak to Amendment 155 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Can I, at the outset, just welcome the offer from Liam MacArthur. to engage in developing amendments as we go forward. I restate my position that I'm undecided on my position at stage 3, and in considering all amendments, I will be seeking to make the bill the best piece of legislation it can possibly be. I'm talking to Amendments 155 and 196. 196, the concern here is around the care of patients seeking assisted dying will extend beyond the authorised health professional roles in the bill. All healthcare professionals providing care to a patient seeking assisted dying should have adequate training, and it's recognition that the relationship between healthcare professionals looking after patients may alter when they decide that they're going to take the route of assisted dying, and I think that to me is something we haven't considered, and which is why I brought this forward. And what Amendment 196 does is makes provision for the Scottish Government to bring forward that training to healthcare professionals on the Act. As I said, I think it's really key that we recognise that those caring for those towards the end of their life are able to understand that decision made by a patient and maintain that kind of relationship. 155, the concern here is around medical professionals' opinion must be truly independent of each other. I think 155 is what it does is it's the limitation of notes to the independent practitioner. The independent practitioner cannot have consulted with the coordinating medical practitioner on the case except for referral, and the independent practitioner cannot have access to the notes by the coordinating medical practitioner from the point at which the first declaration is made, including the coordinating medical practitioner's assessment. I listened to what Mr MacArthur has to say, but my concern here is that this needs to be absolutely clear. It has to be in the face of the bill. Once a patient has declared their intention to seek assisted dying, there cannot be any coordination between the two assessing practitioners, and which is why I brought forward 155. It's so important that both medical professionals are truly independent of each other. I will take an intervention, yes.
The member for taking an intervention. I'm just wondering, in terms of the potential for there to be a lot of missing context, should the second medical practitioner not have access to the original notes, would that not be of a concern in terms of the fullness of information?
No, I think that just for absolute clarity, up to the point of declaration that they wish to seek assisted dying, all those notes would be readily available. It's once the assessment is made after the declaration. I think it's absolutely crucial at that point that both medical practitioners are independent, because they both have to come to the same conclusion for assisted dying to be granted, and to make that absolutely independent, I think is absolutely crucial. Of course, yes.
Thank Brian Whittle for taking the intervention. I have some concerns about what he's proposing here, given that after that first declaration, there may be a change in a patient's clinical circumstances for better or worse. And if that second medical practitioner is not able to access those notes, then they're making a clinical judgment based on historical information as opposed to current medical information. Does he not see that that could potentially cause an issue?
My overriding concern here is that if we're asking two independent medical practitioners to make a consideration, that they must come to the same conclusion. They must be able to come to the same conclusion independently of each other. You cannot have one medical practitioner influencing another. I think it's absolutely crucial to the bill. Of course.
Thank you. Again, I just want to focus upon the notes aspect. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. Are you saying that only the first person who has made their assessment, only that note is not available to the second person? And my other question as opposed to all the notes. My other question is, right now, people have a right to a second opinion in healthcare in general. And following things like complaints and other things, when I have the other person's notes in front of me and I'm speaking to the patient, it gives me a bit of context, but also if the patient says something completely different to what has been written by somebody else previously, that is an alarm bell for me, and that makes me think, hang on a second, something is not quite right. And I would hope, given my position when I'm a doctor, that I am able to act independently when I am asked to act independently, and I'm not going to be unduly put into a position by somebody else. But having those notes does really help.
I thank Sanders Gohani for his intervention. Obviously, from a perspective of a medical professional, it's really helpful. But I think, to clarify to your first point, it is actually the notes around the assessment of their right to seek assisted suicide. So it's not having access to all the notes. I think, secondly, to your point that if they could say something completely different to one medical practitioner as another, surely in that circumstance you would come to a different conclusion. I think that's the protection that you have to have here. If we are truly going to say we're going to have two independent medical practitioners assess, then they have to be truly independent, and they both have to come to the same conclusion independently of each other. And that's why I brought forward these amendments.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. Liam MacArthur, to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 65.
Thank you, Camilla. Can I thank all colleagues for their contribution? Perhaps just touching on the last points that Brian Whittle has made, I certainly understand the intent here. I think for reasons that other colleagues have flagged up, as currently drafted, it is perhaps problematic. I'd offer Mr Whittle again reiterate the offer to work with him ahead of stage 3, but also I think point to the GMC guidance, which already sets out very strict provisions in relation to undue influence of one practitioner over another. But it's an area I'm happy to work with Mr Whittle on ahead of stage 3. I think the exchanges this morning so far have underscored the importance, the crucial importance of training. It is perhaps with a little regret I didn't foresee some of that and put it on the face of the bill in the first instance. But I think what this debate has highlighted is not just the importance of that training to specific groups, whether that be those in the disability community, Pam Duncan-Glancy was referring to, those under 25 that Daniel Johnson was referring to on behalf of Jackie Bailey, or whether it's in the areas of specific training and understanding around palliative care or coercive controlling behaviour. I think Parliament, in a sense, has had an opportunity to set out its expectations in terms of what that training would involve. I think, for the reasons Sanders Gohani underlined, I think there are risks in putting this on the face of the bill rather than, I think, allowing that to rest in both secondary legislation, but more likely in terms of guidance, which is where such provisions sit at the moment. I take Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful. I would just, and I'm grateful for the members' reflections on those points. I wonder if you also might reflect that actually some of these amendments actually coming forward from the professional bodies themselves reflects, I think, a need from the professions or a desire from the professions to strike a slightly different balance as to kind of where you both not just training but also qualifications sit and how that's reviewed.
I take that point entirely. I think what those representations have done has, as I said, facilitated the debate around what the issues that need to be picked up in training. But I would question whether we take a different approach to where that detail sits in relation to this bill compared to other pieces of legislation that we pass. I get the significance of this bill as perhaps seen as greater than some other pieces of legislation, but I would caution against taking a different approach in relation to this bill than we do to other clinical practice, because I think that only opens up scope for confusion and misunderstanding and actually undermines the safeguards. I think we're all determined, irrespective of where we stand on the bill, to ensure as are robust as possible. Sorry, Sanders Gohani.
Just want to clarify that the law doesn't give ministers, either in Westminster or here, powers over postgraduate training. That is deferred to the GMC and the regulations that GMC would give for training. And I think that it is it is very important that training be discussed with registered bodies, as Daniel Johnson spoke about, GMC and other guidance, but we should make sure that there is a uniformity to postgraduate training and education, and giving experts the ability to evolve the training.
I thank Senator Gulhani for that point and certainly agree with it. Could I also welcome the intervention that Bob Doris made earlier, because I think what he also shone a light on with that is the interplay between the requirements on training but also the very necessary option available to those involved, whether the coordinating medical professional or the independent registered medical professional, to make referrals to specialists, whether in palliative care, whether in social work and social care. I think those referrals to those who have the expertise, I think expecting everybody to be an expert on everything is perhaps unreasonable. I think the training does need to pick up a lot of what we've discussed today, but I think sitting alongside that is the absolute expectation that where specialist referrals are needed, that those will be made and the advice that's provided thereafter will be taken on board by the coordinated medical professionals. So again, can I thank... sorry, yes.
Brief intervention, thank you. I'm wondering if you agree that, whilst I have a lot of sympathy with the amendments that have been brought forward by Jackie Bailey, not least in terms of domestic abuse, given I used to work for Women's Aid, I'm wondering whether on the face of the bill, actually putting that needs to be in person is actually going to prove really problematic for individuals accessing such training right across the country, given our geography.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful issue to raise. I think it's why we need the development of that training requirement to be by those who are operating in this area. There'll be areas where face-to-face engagement is absolutely crucial. There'll be other areas where it's not felt to be essential. And I think ultimately we need to ensure that the professionals with the expertise in this area are informing the way in which guidance is taken forward. But as I say, I think these amendments, which involve a great deal of overlap, I think for wholly understandable reasons, have, I think, facilitate a very useful debate, if not about what we put on the face of the bill, then certainly what Parliament would expect in subsequent elements of the process. And with that, I press my amendment 65, Convener.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. The question is that Amendment 65 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. I call Amendment 224 in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with Amendment 65. Paul Sweeney to move or not move?
Moves, Convener.
The question is that Amendment 224 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. I call Amendment 66 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 65. Daniel Johnson to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 66 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The committee is not agreed, and so we shall go to a vote. Those in favour of Amendment 66? Those against? Any abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 66 is 1 for, 7 against and 1 abstention, and therefore the amendment is disagreed to. I call Amendment 151 in the name of Miles Briggs, grouped with amendments shown in the groupings. I draw members' attention to the information on preemptions as set out in the groupings. Miles Briggs to move Amendment 151 and to speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to colleagues as well. Amendments 151, 154, 186, 198 and 213 establish an opt-in model of participation for healthcare staff. The proposal for these amendments are from a number of organisations representing healthcare professionals associated with carrying out functions within the bill. All are neutral in principle to introducing legislation on assisted dying, but want to ensure any legislation that may be introduced protects the needs of healthcare professionals choosing to or not to provide assisted dying to their patients. If assisted dying was to be introduced by this bill, it would be a significant change for healthcare professionals, and it's therefore vital that they are given the genuine choice of whether to participate and to what extent. These amendments would allow only those individuals who have registered that they are willing to carry out functions under the Act to take on the roles of coordinating doctor, independent doctor, authorised health professional or pharmacist responsible for supplying an approved substance for use under Section 15. Amendment 198 establishes a register of willing individuals for this purpose. The Health and Social Care and Sport Committee in their Stage 1 report called for further exploration of an opt-in system at Stage 2 and recognised a number of stakeholders were in favour of such a system. The BMA firmly believes that only those individuals who positively choose to provide the service should be able to do so and has long called for an opt-in system for healthcare professionals should the law change. This has been accepted in other parts of the UK and Crown dependencies in all current legislation making way in these jurisdictions. In Jersey and in the Isle of Man, it's been by doctors and nurses registering their intent to provide the service. And in the Westminster Bill, it's by doctors and nurses opting into the required training. The preferred model would be a register, as it has the added advantage of making it easier for health professionals to direct a patient or to a doctor who would fulfil the role of coordinating registered medical practitioner. It would also make it easier for the coordinating medical practitioner to identify someone to fulfil the role of independent registered medical practitioner and, if required, an authorised health professional. A register would also allow health boards to accurately map the staff available locally and nationally to provide assisted dying. I welcome that Liam MacArthur, MSP, recently agreed that the bill should be based on an opt-in system. However, I believe that this must be made explicit on the face of the bill in order to give the health professionals across our country the reassurance that they need. And I think it's important that we recognise that there's a psychological difference between assisted dying being something that all health professionals could be expected to participate in unless they use the formal process of opt-out versus only being expected by those who have positively chosen to opt in. Some of the benefits of establishing an opt-in model are it gives a greater degree of choice about participation, protects against expectation and pressure to do training and participate, and ensures that staff who do participate receive the appropriate training and are deemed competent to carry out all roles. I therefore yes, yeah.
Thank you. Can I thank the member for the intervention? Just go back to, if I take what the member says, and take it back to what I said before, in that whether you decide to opt out or opt in, there will be, our medical professionals will have patients who move from a situation where they're not in an assisted dying position to seeking assisted dying. Do you not think it would be responsible to have the idea of assisted dying training across the whole of the medical profession, given that even though they might not want to participate in helping somebody to an assisted dying, they will have care responsibilities?
I think if the bill passes, it will therefore be acknowledged by all healthcare professionals, but whether or not people want to take part in that is the important choice I'm trying to introduce with this opt-in. I'm sure, as Sandesh Gulhani has outlined, this will become part of a training conversation, but whether or not when someone starts their actual careers, they want to be part of delivering this within our NHS, I think is where the opt-in model would be best placed. And I think that then answers a lot of questions medical professionals are suggesting to all of us about whether or not in the course of their career they will actually have a patient who requests this of them, and how they will actually be able to deliver on their wishes. I therefore urge the committee to vote for the establishment of that opt-in system on the face of the bill to provide that assurance. Yes, yep.
Just on a technical point, so if you are a registered general practitioner, the GMC will hold a separate list for you. If you are a consultant, you have a separate list, and so on there. Is that what you're proposing? The GMC would create a list for people who are opting in to be the registered individual rather than caring responsibilities or anything else? Is it just that specific that you're talking about?
So I'll come on in a second to Amendment 194, but I think in terms of how we will be able to then make sure all training, all updating of training is provided, that single opt-in register would make sense. And I think that's where I'm open to where that would sit. I think given the different professionals with different responsibilities in this space, that's something I think would be sensible to look towards how that can be taken forward best by these bodies at stage 3 as well. So moving on to Amendment 194. Yes, yeah.
Thank you, and I thank the member for taking the intervention. Just for clarity, you said that the opt-in option would be at the beginning of their medical training. Do you foresee having an opt-out facility if someone was, because somebody's mind could be changed as their training goes on and they deal with day-to-day situations? So either way, whether they could change it to, if they opt out at the beginning, could they opt in later, and vice versa?
So I think there's two aspects to that. Firstly, people who will be coming out of their training and starting their careers, and I think that's when registering their wishes to opt in. But I take on board your point. I think that's where there has to be flexibility. If people opt into this system and then decide they don't want to, then they're able to say, I'm actually not opting in any longer. I think the opt-out model doesn't create the capacity we need of professionals to know where they are, to provide that ongoing training and updating of training, and actually to make sure that we have actively said to healthcare professionals, are you intent on doing this work? And you've opted in to do that. And I think for everybody, that then creates that specialist team to deliver across the country. Because otherwise, and it is one of my concerns, some people might only have one patient ever requesting this of them over the course of their career. And I think to put an individual in that situation isn't fair and doesn't necessarily provide all the safeguards which the bill has been pointing towards. So that's where I see this opt-in model then provides exactly what we want to achieve. Moving on to Amendment 194, which also I think touched on some of the points Jackie Dunbar maybe was pointing towards as well. And this proposal is an amendment from the BMA, who represent all branches of practices of doctors who will be associated with carrying out the functions within the bill. The BMA is neutral on the principle of introducing legislation on assisted dying, but wants to ensure any legislation that may be introduced protects the needs of doctors choosing to or not to provide assisted dying to their patients. BMA Scotland members are concerned that should they choose to or choose not to participate in providing assisted dying, it may impact on them professionally. They may be subject to discrimination or detrimental treatment either in their current job or any future jobs they may apply for, and concerns include jeopardising career prospects or ostracisation. All other jurisdictions where assisted dying is being introduced and debated has included statutory protection from detriment for doctors based on their views and or intentions towards assisted dying. This amendment, as drafted, includes a protection for the employee-employer relationship, as well as potential employees and GP partners who are independent contractors to the NHS. It protects those who may wish to participate and those who may choose not to participate in assisted dying for any reason. Other professional bodies representing healthcare staff took a similar position to BMA Scotland on the need for the inclusion of additional protections in the bill during this stage 1 evidence. And I know the Health and Social Care and Sport Committee also recognised this matter and requested further consideration at stage 2. Therefore, urge the committee members to vote for this amendment and other amendments which provide protection for health professionals against discrimination or detrimental based on their views and intentions related to assisted dying. And I move all the amendments in my name. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Briggs. Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 27 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Can I start with an apology that my remarks are going to be, again, on the lengthy side, but again, it's a reflection of the amendments in this group I want to do justice to. Can I thank Miles Briggs for very helpfully setting out the rationale for his amendments and the case for an opt-in model, which has always been my intention, and I think the amendments that I'm bringing forward in this group help reinforce that fact. Amendments 39, 40 and 41 amend the current conscientious objection provision in the bill to broaden it out so that no person is under any duty to directly participate in anything authorised by the bill. This is broader than the conscientious objection provision, as a person no longer needs to claim a conscientious objection to participating, but can decide not to directly participate for any reason. My original policy intention was to include a conscientious objection provision similar to that provided in abortion law, so that health professionals would not be under a duty to participate in the provision of assisted dying if they had a conscientious objection to doing so. My intention has always been that no health professional would be expected to participate if they didn't wish to. This should cover anyone directly and actively involved in the process, by which I mean anyone carrying out functions in the process as set out in the bill's provision. Following stage 1, I've reflected carefully on how best to ensure the bill fully reflects my intended policy, and have concluded that to simplify the matter further, rather than relying on a CO provision, the bill should allow anyone carrying out such functions to not participate directly for any reason, thus ensuring that only those who are content to participate directly do so. This will have implications for overall training need, thereby, I think, reducing some of the cost issues raised by Scottish Government. Amendment 39 adds the word directly after participate. This is in line with my view that there should not be a blanket provision that would allow any person, however peripherally involved in some aspect of the wider process, to be able to not perform their role. Instead, it's intended to ensure that the provision is focused on those people who are directly involved, for example, the independent registered medical practitioner or the authorised health professional who may be approached by the coordinating registered medical practitioner to undertake the duties in sections 6 and 15 of the bill. Amendments 39, 40 and 41 enable a debate on the pros, cons and potential consequences of a change from CO to only those directly participating who are willing to do so. Turning next to Amendment 27, it's always been my policy that a person first seeking assistance should be directed to another medical professional if the medical professional they first approach does not wish or is unable to perform the role of coordinating registered medical practitioner. My understanding is that such signposting already takes place in healthcare settings, and this was therefore not specifically provided for on the face of the bill as introduced. However, on reflection, I've decided to bring forward this amendment to ensure that someone seeking an assisted death is either directed towards a registered medical practitioner who is willing and able to participate, or given further information on how to proceed. This does not require a formal referral of the person to another specific registered medical practitioner, but it does require the registered medical practitioner approached by a terminally ill adult looking to make a first declaration, if unwilling or unable to participate, to then signpost the person to where they can receive information about how to proceed and/or where they can make a first declaration. This may involve, for example, a GP at a medical practice directing a person to another GP at the practice who is willing to participate in assisted dying provision. In later groupings, we'll have a chance to consider amendments relating to the provision of information. Regarding the other amendments in the group, Amendments 151, 154, 186, 198 and 213, lodged by Miles Briggs, form part of the debate on how best to provide for health professionals to decide whether they wish to participate directly in the provision of assistance, as we've heard from Mr Briggs himself. At the heart of these amendments is a requirement for Scottish ministers to regulate, to establish and maintain a register of persons willing to carry out functions under the Act of coordinating registered medical practitioner, independent registered medical practitioner, authorised health professional and registered pharmacists supplying the substance. I considered such an approach when originally looking at how best to proceed on this issue and came to the view that the establishment of such a register was not necessary. In practice, it is likely, as seen in other jurisdictions, that such registers will form part of the information held in each health board, and nothing in the bill at the present time would prevent that from happening. However, I am not persuaded that mandating the establishment and maintenance of a central register, requiring individuals to notify Scottish ministers of their willingness to participate, is appropriate or proportionate. Having said that, can I again pay tribute to Miles Briggs for the way he's engaged with me on these and indeed other issues, particularly around palliative care. I'm keen to continue working with him to see how this bill might be further strengthened, and thank him for the constructive approach that he's taken throughout, not just with me, but I know with other colleagues as well. Turning to the related amendments lodged by the equally constructive Jackie Bailey and being spoken to by the ever-constructive Daniel Johnson, 74, 80, 81 and 82 relate to the establishment of a register of psychiatrists who can undertake assessments as set out in the bill. These amendments provide that psychiatrists may apply to be on the register, and to do so must be an approved medical practitioner or meet criteria set out by ministers in regulations. I recognise Ms Bailey's work with the Royal College of Psychiatrists on these provisions. It's important that the assessing registered medical practitioners are able to seek the input of specialists when assessing capacity, which is why the bill provides for that in section 7(2)(b). That provision allows for such referrals to be made by either assessing doctor to a registered medical practitioner registered in the specialism of psychiatry, or who has qualifications or experience in the assessment of capacity. Section 7(2)(c) provides that the views of such specialists must be taken into account by the assessing doctors. I firmly believe that such specialists will be capable of assessing the capacity of an individual for the purposes of the bill without the need to create a new register, just as will take place currently in other matters of determining capacity. Section 3(2) of the bill sets out the capacity requirements for a person being eligible to request assistance. I note the Scottish Government has highlighted legal and technical concerns as well as deliverability challenges with these amendments, which on balance I don't believe are necessary. Amendment 74 is preempted by Amendment 159 in the Group on Assessments of Terminally Ill Adults. There are several amendments in this group which are concerned with the issue of providing for variations of a no detriment provision to ensure that no person suffers any detriment as a result of a decision on whether to participate or not, as Miles Briggs has set out. This includes Daniel Johnson's Amendment 11, Jeremy Balfour's Amendment 192, Paul Sweeney's Amendment 248 and, of course, Miles Briggs' Amendment 194, which establishes employment and partnership protection for involvement or non-participation. Employers must ensure there is no detriment to an employee for actually or potentially participating or not participating in the Act. As I've stated, it's important that those who do not wish to participate directly in the process are protected, and I'm supportive of the principle of individuals suffering no detriment. I note that the Scottish Government has indicated that such amendments may relate to the reserved matter of employment rights and duties and industrial relations. As I previously said, I am aware the Scottish Government is working with the UK Government to ensure the full operation of the bill should it be passed. The Scottish Government will be considering this and other amendments and any effect that it might have on current engagement with UK Government counterparts, and I hope the Cabinet Secretary will continue to keep the committee informed on those discussions. Meantime, Parliament might wish to return to this issue and see it addressed as these amendments are addressed at stage 3. This group... yes, certainly.
I'm grateful. And again, just for clarity, is it Liam MacArthur's position that he's asking the committee not to support any of these amendments, but that he thinks the issue may be possible to address in another way within devolved competence at stage 3? Is that where he's at?
Just to be clear, I mean, I think as Miles Briggs helpfully indicated, this is a feature of other legislation being taken forward at Westminster and in Jersey and the Isle of Man. It would be my intention and expectation that that would apply to this bill as well. I think I have concerns around passing amendments at this stage, at the point where discussions between UK and Scottish Government are ongoing in relation to those areas of legislative competence. So I think this will need to be a feature of any legislation finally passed by the Parliament. But at this stage, I would urge the members who have lodged the amendments, perhaps not to press them, with the reassurance that we can return to this at stage 3. This group also contains amendments which seek to allow organisations to opt out of the process. Daniel Johnson's Amendment 16 extends the conscientious objection provision to Section 18 to care homes and hospices, therefore introducing an organisational conscientious objection rather than a conscientious objection provision limited to individuals as contained in the bill at present. Amendment 20 adds a no detriment clause to the effect that a care home or hospice that opts out, as per Amendment 16 and relevant to general no detriment for individuals and organisations in Amendment 11, must not suffer any detriment by a public authority as a result, and that no funding of a care home or hospice can be dependent on it providing or permitted assisted dying. With regard to Amendment 16, I refer to my amendments to remove the conscientious objection element and replace it with the broader no duty to participate provision. My amendments to Section 18 would mean that no individual is under any duty to participate directly in anything authorised by the Act, but there would be no obligation to claim or demonstrate a conscientious objection. Not wishing to participate for any reason would be sufficient. As I've stated, I have significant concerns about establishing an organisational opt-out. As I told this committee at stage 1, an organisation might well include individuals who are willing to participate in this process. It then ceases to be about individual choice. The risk, too, is that barriers are put in place to individuals who, despite meeting all the eligibility criteria and being protected by the safeguards that are in place, find that as a result of an institutional opt-out, they are not able to access that choice. We've seen that happen in other jurisdictions, and it's proved extremely problematic. It also, I have to say, cuts across the patient-centred principles and ethos at the heart of palliative and hospice care. Likewise, for Jackie Bailey's Amendments 52 and 60, I support the principle of a no-duty provision for individuals, but I'm not supportive of extending that to permit organisations to decide whether or not to participate. Establishing such an organisational choice could act as a significant barrier to a person being able to access assistance under the Act. The potential effect of this amendment would be that a person in a particular care home or hospice would need to be moved to other premises in order to access the assistance they wish at the most inappropriate of times. Some of the testimonies, I think, that are set out in the Dignity in Dying briefing for today's proceedings are certainly worth reading in that context. It's not to say, however, that hospices should not be given flexibility in the way that they engage with the provisions of this legislation, and that is what we see in other jurisdictions. But my position remains that an individual can decide not to take part for any reason, but if a registered medical practitioner and other relevant health and social care staff are willing and able to participate, then the fact that the terminally ill adult resides in a particular setting should not prevent them accessing assistance if eligible. I note that Amendment 190 preempts Amendment 40 and Amendment 41 preempts Amendment 191. Regarding Jeremy Balfour's Amendment 190 to 193 and 211, in terms of Amendment 190, my own amendments to Section 18 reframe the section by replacing the reliance on a CO with a wider no-duty provision so that no person is under any duty to participate directly in anything authorised by the Act. Amendment 190 would amend the existing CO provision, in my view, too broadly by making reference to a person facilitating, quote, in any way, anything authorised by the Act. I note that the BMA, when addressing similar amendments in the Westminster Bill, reinforced the need to quote, ensure that the doctor's views are respected, whilst also crucially ensuring that patients can easily access the information and support they need. Amendment 190 could exclude patients accessing their crucial right to information, something I know Mr Balfour would not wish to see. Amendment 191 would move the burden of proof away from existing legal precedent. It is also not necessary, as if a decision is made to move to a wider no-duty provision, then such a provision will not be required in any event. And I have lodged an amendment to remove that subsection from the bill, subject to further discussion and considerations, including with the Cabinet Secretary ahead of Stage 3. Amendment 192 is another no detriment amendment. As I say, I'm sympathetic, but given the amendments I've put forward to section 18 and the further considerations that may be required ahead of stage 3, I would ask the member not to press. And finally, Amendment 193 and consequential 211 also seek to establish a form of institutional objection, as does Stuart Macmillan's Amendment 249. I've made clear why I don't support such an approach and would urge members not to press and the committee not to support. Convener.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. Daniel Johnson to speak to Jackie Bailey's amendment number 74 and also to amendment 11 in his name and all other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Convener. The amendments that I'm going to speak to in this grouping fall into 3 substantive subcategories. One around individual opt-out, the second around particularly organisational, but with a particular view for hospices and care homes, and finally the points around a register for psychiatrists. On the first point about individual opt-outs, I think it is really important that we make sure that this is as straightforward as possible. I'm not going to reiterate, I think, the arguments that Miles Briggs set out, I think, very clearly, but I think it is important that we make sure that those opt-outs are as straightforward as possible. That speaks to Amendments 11 and 16 in my name in particular. Amendments 52 and 60, again, were drafted in conjunction with Chas and Regard Hospices. And I listened quite carefully to what Liam MacArthur said, and I understand that the broader point around institutional and organisational opt-out. But I do think hospices require a degree of particular care and attention with regard to this bill. We are not talking about large, faceless institutions. I think any one of us who has visited a hospice recognise that they are quite often small, very personal contexts. This is not a kind of a clinical environment. And this is not about necessarily ideological opt-out, but this is about allowing hospices to look at what the implications are of this bill and to get their care right for the people who are within their care. And I think if I may just finish my sentence at the very least, and I think the concern here is that because of that intimate nature, that actually the practice with regard to one person may well be interact with others within that same context. So this is about where, I mean, again, we're talking about small settings where there aren't sufficient staff in order to undertake these duties, just because of the small numbers of staff, and in particular if there are staff that wish to opt out. And there may well be in this. I think there's a great deal of concern amongst those working within hospices. And I know I've spoken to people working in hospices just outside my constituency, actually, rather than just outside, but also where there may not be sufficient capacity or physical layouts of these in order for them to do so in a delicate and understanding way, because I think there will be implications for other people. And with that, I think I've finished my sentence. So I'll first of all take Mr MacArthur and then I'll listen to Mr Balfour.
Can I thank Daniel Johnson for taking the intervention and for setting out, I think, a reflection on the hospice sector that I fully recognise. I understand some of the concerns that have been expressed, but would he also accept that the hospice sector is made up of hospice communities, and those communities aren't simply those that are directly employed within those hospices, those communities stretch rather wider, and that within that community there will invariably be those who are very concerned about what is proposed in this bill and would not want to participate at all. There will be others who are very comfortable with it, would see it as an extension of the sorts of patient-centred support that they already provide. There will be others who are uncertain, as I know many colleagues are, and indeed will want to see the detail of the bill and how that might impact upon them before making a decision one way or t'other. and that the risk in introducing an institutional or an organisational conscientious objection is we remove the choice from individuals within the hospice community from participating, if they wish to, with the strict safeguards that are in place, and allow essentially a veto on that choice by those who are opposed to it, for reasons I fully respect, and would be similarly under no duty to provide any provision that's set out in the bill. So would he not accept that cutting across individual choice is something that we really should be steering clear of, if at all possible?
I understand the point, and I recognise that this is complicated and delicate. But I think that the flip side of that very same coin is that there is a very real concern from those within the hospice sector that by undertaking this, especially in small, intimate settings, that actually the practice with regard to palliative care for those who are not wishing will be affected. And that is sort of essentially something that is just impossible to avoid, given the nature of many of these. And it's not going to be every setting, but I think in particular, it may well be the regulations, make very specific considerations around this. But I think, I would ask the member just to understand that if his arguments are correct, I think there is a very real flip side to the same coin, is that one practice is unavoidably affected by the other. Indeed.
So I don't want to cut across Mr Balfour, but again, I understand the point that's been made. I think the concern in relation to an organisational opt-out is that, in a sense, any nuance around the debate about how an individual hospice might participate, the extent to which it might participate in the delivery of this on behalf of the patients who meet the eligibility criteria and wish to pursue that choice, is lost. In the sense, the veto, in a sense, the organisational veto of any choice exercised by individuals within that hospice community, I think is not a place that this Parliament wished to go. I think there'll be nuances about how each hospice engages with it. That is what we've seen in other jurisdictions. And I think that's what is safeguarded in the provisions in this bill.
I mean, again, I would just say that I think the reverse is potentially also true, is that in a sense, by not permitting that you are in effect creating a mandate, and therefore that there is a concern that practice within palliative care will be kind of just inextricably altered by that practice. And I think that's a concern that we need to listen to. Mr Balfour.
I'm grateful to the member. Does she have concerns that we are future-proofing this bill for future generations if it is passed? And with funding already under pressure for hospices, that future governments, future parliaments may look at this and say, we will only fund those that carry this out as well, unless they have got that absolute opt-out.
So, and I thank Mr Buff for that comment. And that's very much at the heart of why I brought forward Amendment 20. Because I think that there is one thing to bring forward a notional opt-out, either for an individual or for an organisation, but I think especially in this situation with regard to hospices, is that there is a notional opportunity to opt-out, but actually financially that practice becomes such that is not really a practicality, and especially given the precarious circumstances that hospice finances find themselves, given the partial funding through the NHS but not complete, I think we again need to tread very carefully. And I recognise this as a matter of balance, but I think given the very personal nature of this, I think it's really important that we allow, I think, that flexibility, especially for hospices and also for potentially for care homes. Yes, I will just about move on to the next point, but very happy to.
Just very briefly, and thank you very much. I wonder if you recognise that this, if it would pass, would actually create real difficulties for an individual who may be in a hospice setting at the end of life and be forced to move out. And we have seen that there has been testimony to that across the world, where there is an institutional opt-out in place that creates a system where the person at the centre of that care is actually unable to realise their wishes, and it creates a lot of stress and anxiety in their final hours at times.
Yes, but I mean, again, I think that there's a question about whether or not that introducing care homes actually produces pressure on people in the other direction. People who do not wish to consider an assisted death, but actually, and I think this is at the very heart of it, because of the very personal nature, the very small nature of many of these hospices, that actually that almost becomes the assumption that they're introduced to. So I think I recognise the point, and I recognise the stress that it might cause. But I think with any, I'm sorry, was that an intervention?
Yeah. I'm just really concerned. Thanks for taking the intervention, Dan Johnson. We've seen examples in other parts of the world where effectively individual choice is removed, and it does concern me that it feels like we're joining dots here and assuming that a set of circumstances will come about by the if we don't have this institutional opt-out. And I just feel like there's two dots being joined ahead.
So yes, and I'd certainly say that it's not nonsense to raise the concerns about patient pathways, because I think actually in any clinical circumstances, a patient journey, and actually the degree to which that patient journey is patient-centred is absolutely of critical salience. I think we live in a healthcare settings where things are very complex, terminology is being used that people don't necessarily understand, aren't familiar with, considerations and circumstances that people aren't used to. It is a disempowering, healthcare is very often disempowering to the patient. I think, therefore, making sure that those settings are such that people are comfortable, and that also that they're not. I think the other thing that very often happens in a healthcare setting is that people's decisions are naturally going to be influenced by kind of the broader assumptions within those settings. So, look, I don't dismiss for a moment. And absolutely, if the members ask me whether there's speculation here, yes, there is. And that is absolutely what Stage 2 is about. It's about to explore those speculations. So I recognise the complexity about allowing opt-outs, about whether or not patients would need to move. I see Mr Gahani having words for me that I would like to make a little progress. I wasn't actually intending to speak for as long in this section as I am. So I'm really just asking us to contemplate. And it's not that I dismiss those things, but I also would ask if for those people that are saying, would this cause disruption or distress for Parliament to move, actually is the reverse also possibly true, given the very intimate setting of hospice, that introducing someone in that environment with those set of assumptions may well do the same thing for the other cohort of people. Not that I think this is binary, but I would ask the committee to consider that. Finally, there is a set of amendments, again drafted in conjunction with the Royal College of Psychiatrists, 74, 80, 81 and 82. 80 would, and I promise I will not speak in as great a length to these as I've done to the previous ones. Amendment 80 creates a registered psychiatrist to undertake capacity assessments. 74, if not preempted 159, the key point of this is about undertaking such assessment should be drawn by practitioners from a central register. 81 is to ensure that the registered psychiatrist is not just a list, but is used to seek to improve learning and general clinical practice, enables data collection and assessments carried out under the bill used for oversight, and 82 is an amendment. And in essence, I think there is, throughout our deliberations, a concern about making assessments around capacity. I think the psychiatric profession in particular taking a keen interest, and I think in particular when you're talking about people with other associated mental health conditions, particularly in later life issues such as dementia, I think having a detailed understanding around dementia and getting that input from the psychiatric profession is very important. And with that, I will close.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. Stuart McMillan to speak to Amendment 249 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I have listened to the comments by Liam MacArthur earlier, but I think it's still actually very worthwhile to speak about this particular amendment. So, the amendment has been drafted with the Salvation Army. The Stage 1 report noted in paragraph 356 that a widespread view that there needs to be more clarity about how institutions could be reasonably expected to respond to the legalisation of assisted dying if the bill were to pass. The Salvation Army is very much a key provider of social services across the country, including in my own Gnukin and Brookline constituency, including 16 residential and non-residential services for people experiencing homelessness. In other countries where assisted dying is legal, such as Switzerland, the Salvation Army have informed me that they had government funding and commissioning for, in particular, residential services put under threat because they had not wished to provide facilities for assisted dying on their premises. Section 18 of the bill recognises that individuals who are working with a terminally ill person may have a personal conscientious objection to assisted dying. It respects their right to hold that objection by saying that nobody should suffer any detriment because they cannot, in conscience, take part in the assisted dying process. But the Salvation Army, and I support them in this aspect, believe that organisations too can have that conscience based on their ethos. Many organisations which provide care and support to vulnerable people, including people who are terminally ill, do so because the people who founded the organisation had a set of moral beliefs that impelled them to provide care for people who actually need it. Those beliefs have entered into the conscience of that organisation, that they provide the moral and ethical basis for its continued work. They are the reasons that the organisation continues to do what it does. Sometimes those beliefs will support or be neutral towards the idea that terminally ill adults should be able to choose help to end their own lives. And the organisation will be able to accommodate the legalisation of assisted dying with little difficulty, but sometimes that will not be the case. Sometimes an organisation will have a view of human life or of its own role at the end of life that will not be able to accommodate legalised assisted dying. And if such an organisation is told that it must accommodate legalised assisted dying or lose public funding for its services, it will be placed in a very difficult dilemma, a dilemma of a kind which the bill says that an individual should not be exposed to. The Salvation Army are calling for a clear statement that organisations should have a right to exercise conscientious objection to participation in assisted dying. No organisation or individual should be penalised for their conscientious objection to assisted dying. Thank you, Convener. Sure.
So just on that point, I'm just trying to understand. You made the point that Salvation Army is an organisation, part of what they have is effectively people's homes. Are you saying that when someone is dying in their own home, that they shouldn't be allowed to access this legislation if they qualify and wish to within their own home, and that the Salvation Army should be allowed to block people taking a decision that they've chosen in their own home?
Thank you.
Or any other organisation? Sorry, it's just that you mentioned Salvation Army. It's obviously much wider than that. So.
Sure, no problem. No, thank you. No, thank you for that question. No, that's certainly not the purpose of this amendment. Salvation Army, I'm not sure if Salvation Army operate within your constituency, Mr Fitzpatrick, but certainly I know the engagement I've had with them over many years because of a range of services that they operate. That certainly is not kind of where they are coming from in this. I think I'll go back to the Switzerland point that I referenced. In the end, the Salvation Army had to operate within the rules, within also the new law that took place in Switzerland. but they did find it quite difficult to undertake that. So in terms of the situation here with this legislation, the Salvation Army wouldn't want to be in that position that people would have to leave their premises. But at the same time, as an organisation, it's an organisation that clearly does not believe in the premise of assisted dying. Sure.
Just, thank you. Just to further explore that point, because I think the effect of such amendments of an institutional organisational opt-out would essentially be that somebody would not be able to avail themselves of an assisted death in essentially what would be their own home, having been in and out of many organisational settings where people who are experiencing homelessness are residing. That is their home at that point. So I'm wondering if are they more talking about their funding being at risk? Should because I think you can't uncouple both of those things, and I think that that's maybe where you're trying to go with that. I think that they would be inextricably linked should they have an organisational opt-out.
Simply because of the experience that the organisation faced in Switzerland, it clearly was a concern for them, but fundamentally they will abide by the law in any country that they operate in, which I'm sure we would all appreciate and expect. But also, as an organisation, they clearly don't support the legislation that's proposed, and it would be very difficult for them, particularly in their residential settings, to, if the bill were to pass, to operate within that. But they would not be breaking the law.
Jeremy Balfour to speak to Amendment 190 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the committee. I wonder if I could ask a point of order, Convener, before I start. And that is in regard to the Scottish Government's non-presence here. I understand the Scottish Government is neutral on the bill, but we have heard quite a number of comments from Liam MacArthur this morning about what the Scottish Government are doing with the UK Government and what work they've done. Have the Scottish Government chosen not to be here, or have they not been asked to come? Because I think around the amendments today, it would have been helpful to have had an update from the Scottish Government. So I'm just wondering whether it was their choice or whether it wasn't deemed appropriate.
So, as Mr Balfour will be aware, Scottish Government has taken a neutral position on the bill. They haven't lodged any amendments to the bill, and therefore the presence here was not required.
That's helpful for you. Thank you, Convener. I mean, I do wonder whether it would be helpful to get from the Scottish Government some kind of update in regard to where they are, particularly in some of the amendments that we've had today from other people. If I can move on to...
In terms of that, Mr Balfour, before we get there, the committee did receive an updated letter, I think last week or the week before, from the Cabinet Secretary for Health. It's on the committee's website, so you may wish to familiarise yourself with that.
I think it was just to address some of the very specific points that have been raised this morning. In regard to the amendments, I obviously coming late to the party in regard to speaking, it's been interesting to hear from Mr MacArthur and from other members in regard to that. If I can look first of all at Amendment 190, I appreciate the remarks that others have made and that the changes that have been suggested, particularly by Mr MacArthur, but I do still have concerns that even with if these proposed amendments were to go through, they would be inadequate and that they would still encroach on individual conscience. I am concerned that at the moment that to refer someone is not a neutral act. It is participation in it. It makes the object an essential link in the chain leading to another person's death. This is not conscious objection, it is to be compelled complicity. And if we are serious about respecting moral diversity in our health service, we cannot reduce conscience to a paperwork exercise. A doctor or nurse who believes that assisted suicide is wrong must not be forced to facilitating it indirectly. To do so would empty the right of conscience of any real meaning. I think my amendment also goes further than is in other amendments that we've debated so far, in that it doesn't just include doctors and nurses and pharmacists, but it also includes administrators who will have to do a lot of work behind the scenes. At the moment, even with the amendments brought by others, if I was a secretary or a PA working for someone in this area, I would be legally required to participate in part of the process, including referral, recommendation or administrative involvement. That means those that do not agree with this would be forced to do something that goes against their moral conscience. Yeah.
I'm very grateful to Mr Balfour for taking an intervention. I think I would just, in this instance, draw the parallel with the established practice in relation to the way that conscientious rejection works in the area of abortion, where there is a requirement for a practitioner to participate. But there is an expectation of a referral or a signpost on, so that a patient is not left with no option whatsoever. I think there's a duty on medical practitioners, whatever their views, to ensure that their patients get the support that they need. I think the no duty provision I think makes it far clearer that there is no expectation on them to participate. But I think whether it's a referral on or a signpost on, and I know the BMA have raised issues around the specific understanding of referral, which is why amendments refer to the signposting on. But would you not see that as a reasonable way of respecting the rights and choice of medical practitioners, but ensuring that patients don't come up against a brick wall when they're looking for choice, often at a very vulnerable point in their lives?
Can I thank Mr MacArthur for his intervention? I think I would have more sympathy with that if we were going down the road of Miles Briggs's amendment. So if there was a list that was available to somebody that wanted to facilitate this, and they could see who and who wasn't, then that would be absolutely very clear. You know, I could look on the website, see within my area who was not, or who was willing or not willing to do this, and then I could then go through that process. And I think that is one of the issues. I also think this doesn't deal with those who will be asked to do things that goes against their views at an administration level. And I am worried that we are going to again exclude people from a workplace environment where they would be happy to do everything else within the workplace environment, but not this, that we may end up losing people from these works. So it's not, and I appreciate what Mr McCarthy said, it's not trying to obstruct patient choice, but it is about ensuring that individuals who are against this are not drawn in to it. To compel participation in assisted suicide, even the referrer, as I said, is not to turn conscience into mere compliance. And this amendment, if it was accepted, I think would give the protection for that is. In regard to Amendments 191 and 192, these are follow-on. I accept again what Mr McCarthy says, but I do think this area of law is new. This area of law goes on individual choices, and that's why I think the burden of proof should be reversed from what is in place for other areas. It specifies that if a claim on conscious objection is alleged to have been improperly or falsely made, the responsibility to prove or justify this claim lies with the person or institution making the allegation, rather than with the individual exercising the objection. And the rationale is very simple. It's to simply protect individuals and organisations who consciously refuse to participate, ensuring that they are not unfairly required to defend their ethical or moral stance. 192 is a full. Yes, happy to.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the member giving way. The section of the bill that he's seeking to amend in Amendment 191 refers to any legal proceedings. and it then says that the burden of proof would lie with the person or institution alleging an improper or a false claim. It's not clear to me that there would always be a person making an allegation of improper or false claim of conscientious objection, even if that framing of the opt-out remains. Surely there would be legal proceedings possible in which no such claim was made. How can he require all legal proceedings to have to rest on a claim that may or may not exist?
Well, I think the issue is protecting the individual. So wherever the claim comes from or wherever the proceedings follow, it's making sure that the individual who has been accused against is having not to prove the case, but it's for the other party to prove the case, whoever that other party is. If I can move on to Amendment 193, which in some ways is similar to that of Stuart McMillan and from Daniel Johnson's. I am deeply concerned if we are going to say to hospices and to other charitable organisations who have an ethical framework that define their care as life-affirming, then they have to go through this procedure. To compel them to participate or to risk losing public funding, as we've heard in regard to Switzerland, would not violate their moral integrity and would betray the trust of those they serve. So this amendment seeks to put that right and expand Section 18. If, as we said, that healthcare providers are going to be exempt, then hospices, hospitals, care homes and hostels who formerly have ethical, religious or philosophical policies that refuse to permit assisted suicide must be allowed to surely opt out. If not, we are going to see hospices or organisations almost not taking on certain individuals so that they are then not going to be in breach of the law. And I think the reverse we could see people who are wanting care or wanting help. Let me just finish the sentence, that's okay. Wanting that help, not being taken in because they do not want to then have to move them or do something else in regard to that. Jackie Dunbar.
I thank the member for taking the intervention, and I'm following this part very closely. But I'm trying to get. You were saying earlier about care homes and hospices. If they weren't allowed to opt out, then that would prevent them from taking people in. Would that not also be the case for members of their team that they'd want to employ? That it would have the opposite effect, that if someone did opt out, if a care home did opt out to say that they were not willing to participate, then that could mean that anybody that they were trying to employ would also have to have the same opinion, because that, to me, from having a father that was in a care home, would cause me great concern that that care home, for example, wouldn't be fully staffed going forward in the future. So if there was no opt-in or opt-out, then that wouldn't be the case. Is that? I'm interested in your views. I'm a bit conflicted here.
Yeah, sure. I don't think what we are saying is what you believe is the key issue. You know, I can believe lots of things. It's what we do in practice. And actually, I think this amendment and the amendment brought by Daniel Johnson and by Stuart McMillan actually gives clarity to people. So we're not saying if somebody can believe that assisted suicide, assisted death is right, all we are saying is that they cannot practice it within that particular institution. So we're not in any way telling people what they can believe or what they can't believe. But what we're saying is that if you come to work for this organisation, if you come and work for this care home, you won't be able to carry out this particular procedure in that home or thing. And I think the advantage of that is that if I am an older person or if I am going to a hospice, I know exactly what services they are going to provide for me. And then I can choose that in appropriate way. So if I think that at some point I may have a terminal illness, I might look for a particular care home that allows me to do that. And the same for other institutions as well. If I could just develop this slightly, and we already have this in other areas of law. We have, certain jobs that we say you have to have certain beliefs or certain practices to take that job. So this is not a new concept. And I think it's really important that we're not telling people you must think this way. All we're saying is that this particular home, hospice, refuge, whatever it is, will not carry out this. And that brings absolute clarity both to staff and to those that might want to serve. Eleanor Wood.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. It's just to explore this a little bit further, if I may. And it's thinking about an individual who may avail themselves of a particular hospice or organisation within their area because that's the closest to them, and who may actually go there with no intention of ever seeking an assisted death, but who then may change their mind as they approach the end of life, depending on what circumstances present them. And I've had this happen recently with a dear friend's mum who is very strongly of a Catholic faith, who in her last days decided to use MAID in Canada. And that was not something that would have been foreseen at the beginning. But also I'm just wondering in terms of that opt-out that you're describing in your amendments and others have described, is that also including any other practitioner who's an opt-in from outside that organisation going into what is effectively somebody's home to provide them a service that they would be eligible should this law actually pass? So is it not just the institution itself, but it actually encompasses anybody else and prevents them from coming in to provide that service?
I mean, in regard to your first point, I mean, most people, the overwhelming majority of people, particularly now, here in Scotland, go to hospices at a very, very late stage. They don't go there for weeks or months. They're going there for the very last few days of their lives. So I think, for very few people will go to a hospice for that long period of time. I think that's not how the hospice movement works here in Scotland. Just a second. And the other issue I think that you raise is, yes, you are. You're saying if you come and work for this hospice or this organisation, as an organisation, we do not carry out assisted suicide or dying. And if you want to work for us, you accept that. And I'm saying that is already in law in other areas, that an organisation will have certain beliefs, philosophies, ideas, and that you have to not necessarily intellectually sign up to those, but in practice you do have to sign up to those. Yes, I think the convener is going to kill me, but I am happy to do that. Inappropriate word, perhaps.
It's just to further explore that, because I understood your point about anybody coming to work for that organisation, if that would be an institutional opt-out. But I was talking about any other practitioner who that person might avail themselves to come into from an external position. Are you saying that that institution would have a complete opt-out, so they wouldn't allow another medical professional from a different setting to come into their setting and help that person to achieve an assisted death?
I think I would draw a differential, and perhaps this is what we need to come back to at stage 3, in regard to if it was, say, a hospice or a physical building. I think they would be excluded from that. More and more people, as we understand, are choosing to die at home. So, your care package may be run by a hospice. If that individual later on decided that they now wanted, to die at home through assisted suicide, through assisted dying, then I think that would be different. That would be coming into their home, it would be coming into their premises. But the organisational ethos needs to be kept to that organisation to feel further. Because one of my biggest concerns is, as in all legislation, we're not just deciding for tomorrow or next year or the year after. We are deciding for future generations. And we all know the financial pressures that hospices are facing, that 50% of their money comes from Scottish Government. My worry would be not this government or even a future government, but governments after that would say, well, you will only get the funding if you offer it as a part of your service. And there would be nothing, as this bill is drafted, or even with the amendments, but Mr MacArthur is bringing, to stop a government doing that. And that's my big concern, is that let's safeguard this so that organisations who offer brilliant services that we all agree on are not going to be forced to do something that they are philosophically against and then miss their funding out. So I think that is where I'm coming from. I don't know if Dr.
Mr Balfour needs to conclude.
He does. I agree.
I would just say to the member that I don't feel that his statement about hospices is quite correct. Hospices are not a place where people go for simply dying and the last few days of their life. Hospices are places which are not full of death. They are full of joy and full of hope for giving people the comfort that they need. And people go there for a while before they die. And I think the contention that Mr Balfour made there was not quite correct.
I mean, I absolutely accept your first point. It always surprises me when I go to Marie Curie here in Edinburgh, or I go to St Columbus here in Edinburgh, how joyful a place they are. I always feel I'm going to come away, but I come away often feeling much more hopeful than I did before I go in. So I absolutely accept that. And I accept that people go for day treatment for many weeks. I think what I was maybe pointing out was more in regard to being actually inpatient. Certainly, the experiences that have been shared with me, both at Marie Curie here in Edinburgh and St Columbus here in Edinburgh, so we have 2 hospices within my region, is that people don't go there for long periods of time as inpatients. I accept they do go as outpatients, but I think those services could be offered by other institutions that didn't want to opt into that. I absolutely will wind up, convener, and stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. Paul Sweeney to speak to Amendment 248 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. My Amendment 248 reflects the themes broadly discussed already by colleagues. As it stands, my view is the bill does not offer enough protection for doctors and other clinicians who, for personal or professional reasons, may not wish to take part in the assisted dying process. So my Amendment 248 would add a clear statutory protection, ensuring that no individual faces any detriment in employment, regulation or disciplinary matters for choosing either to participate or not to participate in the assisted dying process. Fundamentally, this is about respecting professional judgment and ensuring that doctors and other clinicians can act according to their conscience without any fear of adverse consequences. However, I am mindful of what Mr MacArthur said regarding ongoing discussions in relation to the intersection of devolved and reserved competences and the technical detail that needs to be matured there. So I wouldn't be minded to press the amendment at this stage.
And Sandesh Gohani.
I'll be very brief, Convener. We are lucky to sit here in Edinburgh, and I represent Glasgow, where we are lucky to have more than one hospice. We don't have enough beds, but we are still lucky to have choice. And I just think that the debate about opt-out, when you are in a rural setting where you have no choice about where you go, that will exclude people from being able to access hospice care. And I don't think we should put any barriers up to anyone who wants to access hospice care. I personally think that everyone who is dying should be seen by palliative care.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. I'll be brief, and I'm not going to address everything, but I did want to put something on the record about this question about an organisational opt-out. I looked at the various amendments on this as I was going through the amendments for the first time, and I genuinely was open to the argument. And I would like to raise one concern that was in my mind when I started reading the variations on this theme that hasn't been touched on in the discussion, which is if we were to place a requirement on organisations to adopt an organisational policy either in favour or against participation in assisted dying, I would have a concern that that could place organisations themselves under inappropriate pressure. This happened to a certain extent in the early days of the similar policy coming into place in Australia. There could be campaigners in either direction of this policy that would place inappropriate pressure on organisations. And in particular, we haven't really talked about publicly owned public sector organisations. In what way would an organisational policy, whether it's to participate or not, or framed as a conscientious objection, in what way would that be determined for a publicly owned body? Would this ultimately risk becoming politicised and having a political decision made, for example, by a local authority? And I think that would be inappropriate. But I genuinely was interested in hearing the argument to see whether a coherent case could be made for some kind of provision for an organisational policy. As I've listened, I have to say I think some of the arguments in favour of these amendments have been very clearly framed in terms of protecting personal choice and the individual decisions that people have a right to make, and the desire to protect people from being in an environment which places one expectation or the other upon them about the ways that they might exercise their choices. And I think that, to me, suggests that there may not be that it's impossible, but nothing on the table at the moment suggests that we have a way of giving a place for an organisational policy. In just a moment, I don't see anything on the table at the moment that gives a way of giving a place for an organisational policy that doesn't, almost by definition, place everybody receiving services from that organisation under an expectation that they will make one choice rather than the other. I give way to Jeremy Balfour.
I'm grateful. I don't know whether the members will, but in, for example, British Columbia, Delta Hospice have now had their funding completely removed because they're not willing to offer assisted suicide. So would you recognise that from other jurisdictions, this is a real threat to charities and people providing good services, that they could lose their funding? And would you recognise that in some way that needs to be protected?
I think, on the contrary, Jeremy Balfour, in giving that example, it gives a good argument as to why we should retain the opt-out at the individual level, at the level of the individual medical practitioner or professional, and not place that that decision at an organisational level, because it would be organisations that would receive funding rather than individuals. And if the opt-out remains at the individual level, then the issue doesn't arise. So I'm not convinced that we should be supporting amendments on organisational opt-outs as framed at the moment. If anyone wants to attempt a different formulation at stage 3, I will look again.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. Miles Briggs, to wind up, press or withdraw Amendment 151.
Thank you, Convener. And I think listening to the debate, the delivery of an opt-in system will answer a lot of these concerns. So I am keen that we do see it on the face of the bill, because real-world experience is what we're all trying to look towards if this bill does pass. And that very much is around hospices, care homes and hospital. But for the vast majority of people, their wish is to die at home, and how that will be fulfilled by professionals who have the experience, the training. I think the best way to do that is an opt-in system. So I move Amendment 151 in my name.
Thank you, Mr Briggs. The question is that Amendment 151 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Committee is not agreed. We will vote. Those in favour of Amendment 151? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 151 is 2 for, 5 against, and there were 2 abstentions, and therefore the amendment is not agreed to. I call Amendment 49 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 65. Daniel Johnson, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Committee is not agreed. Those in favour of Amendment 49? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote of Amendment 49 is 2 for, 7 against. There were no abstentions, and the amendment is therefore disagreed to. And I call Amendment 225 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 65. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move or not move?
Move, convener.
The question is that Amendment 65 be agreed to. Amendment 225 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Committee is not agreed, and there will be a vote. Those for Amendment 225? Those against? Abstentions?
Should we stop?
The result of the vote on Amendment 225, 2 for, 7 against. There were no abstentions, and the amendment is not agreed. And the question is that Section 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Committee is agreed, and I'm going to suspend this meeting.